My name is Paul Wolliver. I'm the owner of Pinellas Power Products. And this is my installation instruction video for large bore single cylinder multi-fuel generators. This kit, in order to be versatile enough to work with the gasoline and dual fuel and tri-fuel generators, will be an electric fuel transfer pump as opposed to a pulse pump like most of my kits have. The advantage that it gives you is that you will have more versatility. The pulse pumps are limited to a maximum dry lift of 20 inches, where with this kit, using an electric fuel pump, I have the base kit tuned to 24 inches of dry lift. If you have a special need to have up to 10 feet of dry lift, please contact me and we'll go over what you're doing, and I can develop a kit that will give you up to 10 feet of dry lift. So if you need to contact me, please do not try to contact me through the YouTube comment section. I do not monitor the comments. I simply don't have time. If you look in the description section of the video right below here, you will see that there is a link to my website. That's PinellasPowerProducts.com. When you get to my website, you will see a page on the different, you will see pages on the different types of fuel kits that I offer. There is a FAQ section, and then if you still don't see what you're looking for, you can either email me or call me and get me immediately. But whatever you do, please do not attempt to contact me through the comments on the YouTube videos. Real quickly, in order to use this in order to use this extended runtime fuel kit, your generator needs to be, number one, 300 cc's and up. And number two, it needs to be a single cylinder engine. Number three, it would need to have electric start. Number four, it would need to have an independent battery charge coil. It would be available to work on either the gasoline only, or dual fuel, or even tri-fuel generators. They would need to be carbureted as opposed to fuel injected. And last but not least, they would need to have a fuel shutoff valve. And just to be perfectly clear, I'm going to refer to the valve on the front of the generator that says off, storage, gasoline, propane, and natural gas. I will refer to that one as the fuel selector valve. However, the valve on the bottom of the fuel tank, the valve on the bottom of the stock gasoline tank on the generator, I will refer to as the fuel shutoff valve. So for the purpose of this kit, you would need to have a fuel shutoff valve on the generator in addition to the fuel selector valve. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. This kit is going to come in a box with everything you'll need except for the tank itself. And that is because different customers are going to want different size of fuel tanks. Plus, if you were to order it from me, you would be paying to ship a large box of essentially air, because a fuel tank is it's a large box of air, and shipping that across the country would become very expensive. So you can get fuel tanks at Tractor Supply, Amazon, Bass Pro Shops. There's all sorts of fuel tanks that you could use. My favorite would be the fuel caddies, such as the, I think they call it a Duromax Flow and Go, the 14-gallon fuel caddy, and that's listed right here on this page. At any rate, all the rest of the parts that you need, including the electric switch block, and most importantly, will be this flash drive, which is a copy of the video that you're watching right now. However, YouTube will not have put commercials in the middle of this video, so you can play it anywhere on your laptop computer, commercial free. And now let's go ahead and get started with the actual installation. Okay, for the purpose of this video, we're going to be doing the installation on a Predator 13,000. However, there are several different brands and models of generators that this kit will work on. If you're doing it on a gasoline version, versus a dual fuel versus a tri-fuel. There will be slight differences, and I will go into detail as we get to that exact step along the way. So this video will cover the gasoline, the dual fuel, and the tri-fuel of several different brands of generator. Do not let the fact that this says Predator on this generator itself interfere with your understanding of it. One other thing I would like to review is, even though I covered this earlier, is the knob on the front of the generator, that in this case is off/storage. Gasoline, natural gas, and propane will be referred to as the fuel selector valve. This valve on the bottom of the fuel tank will be referred to as the fuel shutoff valve. So if I say shutoff valve, I mean this one. If I say fuel selector valve, I mean this one. And any other time that there is a difference between one generator and the other, I will go over that as I do these steps. Okay, so here in the first step, you're looking at the area right underneath the valve cover and the cylinder head. On several of the brands of generator, you'll see an evaporative emissions canister in this location. Not sure why Predator doesn't use one, how they got away with that. This is probably not legal in California though. So on the Predator, I'm going to remove one of the rubber feet that's right here on this corner. If your generator uses an evaporative emissions canister here in this location, you may need to move the evaporative emissions canister out just a little bit so you can put the fuel pump behind the evaporative emissions canister. Okay, this being a Predator generator, we're going to be mounting the fuel pump right here in this location. I'm going to mount it this direction. There's an arrow on the base that points this way. You'll notice that this end is shorter than this one, so fuel flows in this direction. My kit comes with a longer bolt than the one that was taken out of the mounting tab. And the whole reason for the longer bolt is it'll mount the fuel pump and the mounting foot at the same time. So I'm just going to put this on loosely to mark where the other bolt is going to go, and then I'll drill a hole for that location. And then we'll go ahead and take the fuel pump back off again and drill our hole. If your generator has the evaporative emissions canister, you'll have to move the evaporative emissions canister out. And there may be several holes in this bracket already because this frame may be used for several different types of generator. If you have holes in it that already line up for the fuel pump, you don't have to drill any. I'm going to have to drill one hole, and the other hole I'm going to take advantage of the fact that we're moving the mount pad. Incidentally, if you don't have a right angle drill that'll get in here, you'll have to measure over and then drill up from the bottom. I'm going to drill a 1/8 inch pilot hole, and then I'll drill it out to the 1/4 inch. Okay, now that I've got the 1/8 pilot hole drilled, I'm going to drill it out to the finished size, which is 1/4 inch. And I'm going to drill this one up from the bottom because my 1/4 inch drill bit is a little too long to get in here. Now that we've got our hole or holes drilled, depending on what model of generator you're putting it on, you may not have had to drill any holes. At any rate, we're going to go ahead and assemble our fuel pump. Remove the rubber plugs from each end of the fuel pump. Then, included in the kit will be some Teflon tape. There will be 2 right-angle 1/4-inch hose barbs, and one will go in either end of the fuel pump. I'm going to take a little bit of the Teflon tape that's included in the kit and wrap it around the threads. If you're using Teflon tape, keep it off the face surface. By that I mean do not wrap it over the edge like this, because if you do, when you screw it in, it will shear that piece of thread, or excuse me, that piece of tape off. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap the tape on both of my brass fittings. And as I stated earlier, the pump is going to be installed with the short end facing to your right, and the long end will be facing to your left if you mount it underneath the cylinder head. So ultimately, we're going to want the clocking on both of the hose barbs to be approximately 45 degrees up, because as it's sitting under the cylinder head, you're going to turn the hoses and go past the carburetor and up to the fuel system. If I need to adjust the fittings just a little bit, I can do so. I left this one more vertical so it would tighten it as it rotated at 45. I'm going to leave this one more prone to 90 degrees here, so that as I tighten it, it'll go more to 45, because you want to end up tightening the hose barb, not loosening it. Okay, your kit is going to come with one 6mm bolt, because these generators are all metric, and that would be to replace the short bolt that held the foot peg on if you're using a Champion, or excuse me, if you're using a Predator or one of the generators that has the rubber pegs on it, so you can put that back in the stock position. It will come with 2 1/4-inch bolts in case your generator had nothing there, and then you'll be drilling 2 holes, and you'll put one of these bolts in each hole. And incidentally, put the washer against the plastic fuel pump base, and then it goes through the hole in the steel frame of the generator, so it won't need a washer on that side. Okay, so now that we got our holes ready, we're going to go ahead and install the fuel pump. And because this is a Predator and we've removed the rubber foot, I'm going to be using the longer bolt included in the kit, and that is the metric bolt as opposed to the American thread 1/4-inch bolts. I'm going to install the outer bolt first, only because it's easier. And remember, when you do this, to run the bolt through the ground strap. Now yes, the fuel pump is plastic, but the bolt is metal and the frame of the generator is metal. So the fuel pump is going to ground through the frame of the generator. And we're just going to put this bolt on loose for now until we get the other one lined up. Incidentally, when you put the back bolt in, you'll make sure that the washer is above the plastic so that the washer spreads the load over a larger area of the plastic. The nut is going through a metal bracket, so you won't need an additional washer on the bottom. So now your fuel pump is snug down into place. Okay, this is the fuel shutoff valve that we had touched on earlier. There are two basic types of fuel shutoff valve. One has only one external hose going to the fuel shutoff valve, and that would be taking fuel from the fuel shutoff valve to the back of the fuel selector valve in the case of multi-fuel generators, or if you had a gasoline-only generator, it may go from the fuel shutoff valve directly to the carburetor. Some of the gasoline-only versions have a fuel selector valve in the front, and all of the dual fuel or tri-fuel generators will have a fuel selector valve on the front of the generator. The other type of fuel shutoff valve will have two visible hoses. One will go from the tank into the shutoff valve, and the other will go from the shutoff valve either to the fuel selector valve or to the carburetor. So what we're going to do here is, first thing is take the shutoff valve and shut it off so we don't have gasoline dripping on us. Then we will remove the hose that goes from the shutoff valve to the selector valve or to the carburetor. And that's held on with a Corbin clamp. And let me show you real quickly how Corbin clamps work. When you squeeze on the two tabs, the clamp opens up, and when you release the two tabs, the clamp closes. Some brands of generator will use a 3/16 hose going from the fuel shutoff valve to the fuel selector valve or to the carburetor. Others will use a 3/16 hose. If your generator uses a 1/4-inch hose, you would completely remove both ends of this hose, either from the fuel shutoff valve and from the fuel selector valve, or from the fuel shutoff valve and from the carburetor. This one uses a 3/16 hose, so what we're going to do is put an adapter that goes from 3/16 to 1/4-inch in here. These adapters are included in the kit. You will have two of them. If your generator has a 3/16 hose going into the fuel shutoff valve, you're going to use both of them. If your generator has 1/4-inch hose, you won't use either one. Then we're going to go ahead and put the Corbin clamp back in place. And we'll rotate it up just a little bit so it doesn't scratch the flywheel cover, because that's all nice fresh paint. If your generator had 1/4-inch hose, like I say, you would have removed this hose entirely, and then you'd have made up a new hose that goes either from the fuel selector valve all the way down to the fuel pump, or in this case, we're going to extend the stock hose that went to the fuel selector valve. We're going to take the long section of 1/4-inch hose that's included in the kit, and we're going to cut off a 15.5-inch section to reach down to the output port on our fuel pump. So here is a 15.5-inch section of 1/4-inch hose. We're going to slide it on to the 1/4-inch end of this adapter. Then we're going to slide the other end down to where it goes near the fuel pump output port. As you remember earlier, the short end of the fuel pump is the output port. So we're going to slide this hose onto the fuel output port. You'll notice that I'm not putting hose clamps on anything yet. The kit does come with enough hose clamps to put everywhere, but we're going to wait till we're done with the install just to make sure that we don't need to adjust the length of any of the hoses. Okay, because our generator has a 3/16 output on the fuel shutoff valve, we're going to take a section of 3/16 hose, which is included in the kit. We're going to cut it 8 inches long. And we're going to slide it onto the fuel shutoff valve. Then we're going to take another 3/16 to 1/4-inch adapter, and we're going to push it into the end of this 3/16 hose. And then we will take a 2-inch section of 1/4-inch hose. Just getting a little bit of oil on the adapter makes it a lot easier. So that now we have a section of hose, a total of 10 inches in length, ending in a 1/4-inch. If your fuel shutoff valve had 1/4-inch hose going on here, you would simply cut a 10-inch section of the 1/4-inch hose. No adapter needed. Here you will take a 1/4-inch T-fitting included in the kit and push it into the end of the 1/4-inch hose. Now it's time to select where we put the fuel inlet port. On this particular generator, I'm going to place the inlet port right here because there's nothing behind it to accidentally drill into. You've got a good gap behind it. Where you put the fuel inlet port is really up to your own discretion. I like to put it near the fuel selection valve, or the fuel selector valve, because that keeps all the fuel items in the same general area, and it just makes it easier to remember. Whatever you do, don't go drilling a hole all the way into the fuel tank. Don't go drilling a hole into an electrical wire or something like that. Make sure that you place your fuel inlet port somewhere where you can get at the back of it. You'll need approximately 3 inches of clear space in the back. If you watch this video for a few more minutes, you'll see exactly why, and you can judge for yourself exactly how much room you're going to need. Okay. I use a step drill because it's quick and easy. If you don't have a step drill, You can use a regular drill. It's no problem. If you're using a step drill, be careful not to drill the hole too large, because it does get bigger each time. That's real close. Okay, now that we've got the basic hole drilled, I'm going to use a repairman's reamer to open it up just a little bit to where it's just barely big enough for this threaded portion to go through, because I want a nice snug fit. Like I stated earlier, you can use a regular drill bit or a repairman's reamer, whatever you're the most comfortable with. I like the repairman's reamer because I can take it out in very small steps to where that's a nice tight fit. Okay. So that fits in there nicely. Okay, so now we've got the correct size hole in our plastic panel. And depending on what kind of generator you're installing this on, this panel may be plastic, it may be metal, or you may have decided to install it in a totally different location. And of course, that's user discretion. You can install it anywhere you want to. Just like I said, pay attention, make sure it doesn't look dangerous. So this being the fuel inlet port, the kit also comes with a 1/4-inch hose barb that screws on to the fuel inlet port. And your panel is going to be sandwiched between the hose barb and the fuel port. So the first step is going to be to wrap Teflon tape around the threads of the fuel fitting, just like you did on the fuel pump earlier in this video. And once again, be careful not to overlap the ends of the thread. Put a few layers of Teflon tape on that and then tear it away. Now, included in the kit is going to be a 1/2 inch flat washer. I like the 1/2 inch flat washer on there, particularly on this, because that's a plastic panel and I want to spread the load around just a little bit. So, and incidentally, this piece of Teflon tape, we're going to tear that off after we get it screwed down tight. Okay, that's nice and snug. I like to have the barbs facing downward so that when you snap the fuel hose on, the fuel hose hangs straight down and it doesn't get any kinks in it. Now if you'll come around, you can look and see the back side of the hose barb where you're going to be putting the next section of fuel hose on. This is the hose barb sticking off of the bottom of your fuel inlet port. I've cut a section of hose 12 inches long off of our long section of 1/4 inch hose that came with the kit. We'll be trimming this hose to the appropriate length a little bit later. First step is going to be to slide this hose on to the end of the hose barb. Like so. And then we're going to run it in a gentle S-curve from here around the front of the fuel tank. And you notice the fuel tank on this one is radiused nicely. If it were not radiused, you would wind up having to use zip ties or something to pull the fuel hose up to the front so it did not touch the edge of the tank. You don't want the hose touching anything sharp anywhere. Then we're going to put a fuel filter right about here so that all the fuel that's coming from the remote tank runs through the filter. My kits come with a clear plastic filter with arrows showing the direction of the fuel flow. So even though I cut this hose to 12 inches long to start with, I'm going to wind up trimming it a little bit. So this will run into a gentle S-curve right about here. And that's why I don't put hose clamps on anything until I'm completely done, so that we can adjust everything just the way we like it. Now remember, this is fuel going in, so the fuel is going to be running in this direction, so we'll make sure that the arrows point this way. And then here is our T-fitting. And I already don't like this length here, so I'm going to shorten the 3/16 inch section of hose just a little bit. Let me go ahead and remove that from our fuel shutoff valve. I'm going to take about a 2-inch section of hose to connect the fuel filter to the fuel T-fitting. And then I will trim my 3/16 inch hose to a more appropriate length. Okay, just like so. So now I've cut a 24-inch section of hose off of our long section of 1/4 inch included in the kit. A little bit of oil on the T-fitting. I'm going to put this 1/4 inch hose on, and I'm going to feed it right down through here. And it is ultimately going to connect to the input side of the fuel pump. So as you can see, we'll have fuel entering through the fuel port, going through the fuel filter, and going through the fuel pump if we're running off the remote tank. If we're running off the stock tank, it will come from the fuel shutoff valve to the T-fitting, into the fuel pump, and then back out the fuel pump into the fuel selector valve. Okay. Now we're going to take the other end of that 1/4 inch hose and we're going to slide it onto the hose barb on the input side of the fuel pump. And then we'll go around the end of the generator and check our fuel hoses for length. Okay. Now, before we start putting hose clamps on, we're going to take some of the zip ties included in the kit and loosely zip tie the fuel hoses where we'd like them to run. Now right behind this panel is the propane hose on this one because it is a tri-fuel. If it were not a tri-fuel, if it were gasoline only, then you would have to go around the panel and everything to zip tie the fuel hose. However, This again is up to the discretion of the person doing the install, and you put zip ties wherever you think they're necessary. And then you get an idea of whether the length of any of the hoses needs to be trimmed or adjusted. Okay, I'm going to run this hose behind this one. Basically, what we're doing is we're putting a zip tie anywhere that we think would benefit from having a zip tie to hold the hoses into an orderly location. And we're not going to cinch them down real tight yet. Okay, I'd like to put another zip tie right here, but I can't really do that until I put the hose clamps on. So let me make sure that everything else is in good order before we go too crazy on that. Okay, this kit comes with two different sizes of hose clamps. You got the small ones, and those will be used on the 3/16 hose, and the larger ones, and those will be used on the 1/2-inch hose. Let me show you how these clamps work real quickly. You would take a pair of pliers, and you would squeeze them together. Now, if they are slightly, and we'll go ahead and offset this just a little bit. If they're offset like this, to straighten them up, you would crimp them from the side, and that way they would go together and be nice and aesthetically pleasing. If you want to remove a hose clamp, you would grab it with a pair of pliers and just push sideways. Don't try to force it open this way. Just grab it like that and push it sideways. So now we're going to go ahead and put hose clamps in every location where they need to be. Start with, there's a 3/16 hose going to the fuel shutoff valve here. So we're going to put a small clamp here. And then another small clamp on this end of the 3/16 to 1/4-inch adapter. And that's the 3/16 hoses, because as you'll remember, the hose that we removed from the fuel shutoff valve, we used the stock Corbin clamp in that location. So now, on the 1/4-inch side, we're going to put a larger clamp. And now we can tighten down this zip tie that we used to zip tie this hose to the bracket. Take another large clamp, put it on this portion of the T-fitting. Remember, the T-fitting will have 3 barbs. Make sure that each one of them gets a clamp. And then the fuel filter gets a clamp at each end of it. And these again are large clamps because this is 1/4-inch hose. Then our inlet port gets a hose clamp. And again, that'll be a large hose clamp because that's 1/4-inch hose. And now I can put a zip tie from this section of hose up around the propane line that's hidden behind this brace. And that'll look just a little more aesthetically pleasing than having this pushing out. It's not the end of the world if this hose pushes out, but since there's an easy solution, I'm going to take it. We'll go ahead and trim the tails off of these zip ties. And then we'll go around to the fuel pump and put clamps on the inlet and output side of the fuel pump. This is the inlet side of the fuel pump here. And this is the output side of the fuel pump here. Now we have the switch block, and what this does is it controls the fuel pump. This is the ground lead, and this goes to a chassis ground. This is the power lead, which is 12 volts in. This lead is a sensor lead, and what it's going to do is make sure that the pump is only working while the generator is actually running. If you just turn on the power switches and you go, the pump isn't pumping, it must be a bad pump. No, 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 because the generator isn't running. We don't want the generator to pump fuel if it's not actually running. So if the generator stalls for any reason whatsoever, this will shut the pump off. This is the output power to the fuel pump. And these leads tell the switch block which position the selector valve is in, because you only want the fuel pump to be running when it's in the gasoline position. So if you've got it in the natural gas or the propane position, this is going to shut off your fuel pump also. But you don't want the fuel pump to be running in the natural gas or the propane position, because the electronic solenoid in the bottom of the fuel, or in the bottom of the float bowl, is going to be closed, so the pump will be deadheading. So you don't want it to be running in the natural gas or the propane position. So let's go ahead and install this. I'm going to go ahead and set our switch block behind the hoses for the fuel system, but on top of the main harness. These wires will hang down the front of the generator, and these will hang down the back. We want the red and the black to hang down near the battery area. Neither one will be connected to the battery. However, we want them down in that area because we'll be installing them in another step. These three wires I'm going to run right next to the stepper wires and the choke control wires, because they also go to the carburetor. I would just as soon keep all the wiring together. Okay. The sensor for the engine running, I'm going to leave that hanging down in front. As you remember earlier, this red wire is positive for the fuel pump. So we're going to take this red wire on the fuel pump and plug it together. We can take one of the zip ties included in the kit and zip tie this wire to the fuel hose or to the carburetor, or whatever makes the most sense. And I'm going to wait and do that at the end when I clean everything up, just so I don't have to go moving it and cutting zip ties. Here is a solenoid valve on the bottom of the float bowl of the carburetor. The purpose of this valve is to keep gasoline from flowing from the float bowl into the venturi of the carburetor when the fuel selector valve is in the propane or natural gas position. So if your generator is a dual fuel or a tri-fuel, or some of them will call it a multi-fuel generator, it will definitely have one of these valves. If your generator is gasoline only, it may not have this valve at all, in which case you don't have to worry about the two orange wires. They don't need to be hooked up at all. You can tape them off or whatever you want to do. Now, with these valves, there are two basic configurations. One has two wires that come out of it and go up into the mother harness. The other has one wire going to ground and the other wire going into the mother harness. Now, if you come back here and you feel it, there's the harness on this one, and both wires go through this sleeve up into the mother harness. I can get my hand up in here, and that would be this one right here. And if you look back here, you will see that there are two white and green wires. And let me get the camera on a tripod so that I can show them to you. and then we'll go ahead and hook them up. Okay, these are the two wires that I was talking about. If you follow the harness coming out of that solenoid, let me back up just a little bit so you can see where we are on the generator. This being the fuel shutoff valve. Right behind that, where it's really difficult to get at, there are two bullet connectors. And what we're going to do is we're going to unplug one at a time. So we'll unplug one bullet connector, and that looks like the male bullet connector and a female bullet connector. And we'll demonstrate it like this. They're plugged in together, so we're going to unplug one at a time. We'll plug the male into the female side of this one, and we will plug this male into the female side of the factory one. And then we will undo the other factory one, and we will plug the male side of the factory wire into the female side of this, and we will plug the male side of ours into the female side of the factory one. Unfortunately, it is so tight in there that I don't think I can hold a camera and a flashlight and put it together. Let's see how it goes. Okay, got one of the factory bullet connectors unplugged. So now I'm going to take my harness, push it back in here. I'm going to plug the factory male onto the female from mine. Done. And that was a lot easier said than done. And now we find the factory female and plug it male side of my harness into it. Okay, that's one done. And now we take the other factory harness, or the factory wire, and we plug the male side of it into the female side of my other orange wire. And then the male side of my other orange wire into the other factory female bullet connector. If it's any consolation to you, this is the hardest part of the install. Okay. So, those are the two wires that shut down the fuel pump if you've got it in the propane or natural gas position. And now let's try to zip tie those wires into an orderly manner. Okay, if your generator had one of these solenoid valves that only had one wire running all the way to the mother harness and one wire running to ground, you would cut my bullet connector ends off, or at least the male bullet connectors off. On one of the orange wires, you would put a ring terminal and run it to ground. And it doesn't matter which orange wire you did it with. That's why I made them both orange. But you'd put a ring terminal on it, and I would put it to the same exact ground that the factory solenoid was to. So you'd take out their screw or their bolt from their ring terminal, slide this ring terminal over it, and tighten it back down. Then, on the single wire that goes into the harness, if it uses bullet connectors, then you would unplug the factory bullet connectors and put my orange wire with the intercept harness into it. However, if they use something different, we'll say that this is the wire that goes from the solenoid to the mother harness, and this would be my least favorite method of doing it. I've got posi taps. So you would unscrew the large side of the posi tap, slide it over the factory wire that went from the solenoid, and then you'll see that there's a pin on this. When you screw it down, it pierces their wire. Then you would unscrew the small end of the posi tap. And here's my orange wire. My orange wire that you would have cut the male bullet connector off of, you'd slide over, strip approximately 5 millimeters of wire or of insulation off, slide it in next to the conductor on this posi tap, and then screw it together. And now my orange wire is connected to the factory wire regardless of what kind of wiring plugs they used. And that would only be if you had something that did not use bullet connectors. You'll get 2 of these posi taps in the kit, and you'll get 2 ring terminals. So now let's go on to the next step. Okay. The next wires that we're going to connect up is going to be this connector here, which is coming out of my switch block. You'll notice that there is one wire that comes out of the switch block, and it joins to this intercept harness. The easiest way to identify the wire harness that you're going to plug into, which on this generator would be this one right here, is number 1, the wires will be the same color. Like on this Predator, they're both brown. On Duramax, I believe they are green, typically. But it will usually be a 2-wire connector using the Sumitomo 2-pin number 110 terminals. Okay, the next thing that they have in common is that you'll notice if you trace the wiring harness down, they will come out, let me get this out of the way, they will come out from behind the blower housing. And on this generator, this wire right here that comes out from behind the blower housing goes up and is connected to these 2 brown wires. And let me get it from a different angle here. So that's the wire that we're looking at. You notice that that's the wire we're looking for right there. You'll see just above and to the left of the ground screw is the braided sheath carrying these 2 wires. And they go up, join the main harness, and then they come around, and here they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to unplug these two wires, and then we're going to plug my intercept harness into it. Okay, to unplug these two wires, you simply squeeze in on this tab and they unplug. So you take the male half of the factory harness, you plug it into the female side on my harness. You take the male side of my harness and plug it in to the female side of the factory harness, and you are done. Now, if your generator is using a different type plug than this, what you'll do is cut my brown wire right here, and then you'll use the other posi tap included in the kit to posi tap into one of the factory wires. And you saw how the posi taps work in the earlier section where I demonstrated them. But you will connect my brown wire to one or the other of their brown wires, or in the case of Duramax it'll be green, but at any rate of the battery charge coil wires. The reason they make them the same color is because it doesn't matter which one you go into, so don't let that worry you too much. So now we come to the last two wires, and that'll be the positive 12 volt and the ground wire. The first step will be to disconnect the battery. Some of the batteries you'll have to undo a bolt. On the Predator it's very simple. You just undo this connector and the battery is disconnected. So the ground wire, put to a ground on the engine block. You could run it over to the negative terminal of the battery. I don't like doing that, strictly because I don't want a whole bunch of wires going to my battery when I have to change the battery, which is a serviceable item. I want one wire going to each terminal. So the ground wire on this, we're going to loosen up the screw that goes to the factory ground, and that would be this bolt right here. We're going to take this bolt out, and we're going to slip our ring terminal from our black wire right next to the factory ring terminals, and then we're going to tighten it back down. And let's see if we can get the camera aimed on it while I do this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and loosen up this ground bolt. We're going to slide the ring terminal on the black wire over that bolt along with their ground wires. We're going to put the bolt back into the engine block and tighten it back down. So now the ground is done. The positive wire, okay, now the positive wire, we're going to go to the positive terminal on the start solenoid, and we'll slide this red rubber cap out of the way, and you'll see that there is a nut. We'll simply loosen up that nut, slide the ring terminal on the red wire over that post, and then put the nut back on. then we'll go ahead and push this rubber cap back up and over this stud and nut. And that concludes the installation of the kit itself. In the kit, there is also a fuel connector, and that will go into your fuel tank. There is a Yamaha fuel hose with a prime bulb. There's also a sticker with the operating instructions, and we're going to go ahead and put the sticker on top of the fuel tank so that anytime you're using it you can refresh your memory by reading the sticker. We'll go ahead and hook the battery back up. And now your install is completed. What we need to do is go outside and test it. And remember, once again, as I stated during the installation process, that if you turn the master switch on and turn the fuel to the gasoline position and turn the fuel shutoff to the off position, the pump will not come on until the generator is actually running. And that's a safety feature that if the generator stalls for any reason, I want that transfer pump to shut off so it's not transferring gasoline into a stalled out generator. Also, as I stated earlier, this is my suggested location for the fuel pump. However, if you have a situation where you would rather put the fuel pump somewhere else, that's open to the discretion of whoever is installing it. You could actually even drill holes in this frame rail here. Then the fuel pump would be kind of obnoxious looking sticking out, but if that's the way it needs to be, then it's a free country, do what you want. You could also put it over here. And that's strictly the choice of the person doing it. At any rate, so now we'll roll the generator outside and we'll go ahead and fire it up. If you have any questions whatsoever that are not covered in this video or on my website, then feel free to contact me by email or by phone. Please do not attempt to contact me on the YouTube comments section. I do not monitor the YouTube comments section, so I will not be quickly getting back with you. So if you email or call me, you'll get a reply almost immediately. And I thank you for your time.